You pronounce your last name? Bogue?
Bogue, like Vogue with a V.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us again this month on our Lanteria webinar. I am incredibly excited to talk to Rob Bogue today. We're going to be talking about a topic that is clearly incendiary. I brought this up in a few Facebook groups this week and got replies from people that were very excited about it and excited about learning about it, and replies from people that were very upset that we would even approach a subject like this. So I was really excited. After I got that response, I was like, wow, this should be interesting to hear sort of Rob. He has a fantastic background and some really interesting work that he's doing right now in employee burnout. And we're going to kind of go through the whole gambit of employee burnout and HR of one today. So welcome, Rob. Thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So we'll kind of dive into this right away. What are some of the key experiences or feelings you get when you talk to HR professionals who are in an HR of one?
Yeah, I think maybe I should start with defining what HR of one is.
Perfect.
And
Yeah.
and why that is. And so here's the thing, right? So we know, and this is from my friends at SHRM, they say roughly a third of people are in an HR of one. That means there's nobody else, right? And sometimes I was talking to a buddy of mine yesterday, and he's like, "Yeah, the CFO is also the chief human relations officer." And if you think about two incompatible things, those are pretty much the two that I would pick. But the thing is, the organization is small, maybe growing, maybe doing great things and going to be an amazing organization, but at the same time is still small. And
Yeah.
so when I talk to an HR of one, I'm talking about the folks who are trying to keep the wheels on the bus until they can hire that second and the third and the fourth and the fifth person, and when it's appropriate for them to do that. And so I'm talking to them, and I consistently get this sense that they're overwhelmed, right? And there are these things that happen to them that feel like they're random because they don't have time to know or do all of the things, right? And I think the other thing that's sort of interesting about this group of folks is more than other organizations, more than the larger HR folks, hey, I'm one of 200 or whatever, is
Yep.
they feel like they're chasing their tail. They feel like they know there are things that they could do to help them strategically that would help them in their day-to-day. But their choice is go work on that or talk to Susie. The choice is go do that or actually get people paid, because they're kind of important to pay people, right?
Yeah. Keeps people happy usually.
Yeah, I mean it helps. And
Yeah.
so those are the feelings and experiences I get out of folks who are in that HR of one is, I'm overwhelmed. I don't even feel like I've got the time to start to automate my process so that I'll have more time.
Yeah. Yeah, the implementation of new systems and new tools is actually something that I think a lot of times it's sold to people as this very easy out of the box thing that's going to help you, but in the end, it actually ends up being more work, to get it set up than it might take off your plate.
It was
Which,
certainly in the very short term, yes,
yeah,
right? The month you do the implementation, you're working overtime, right? Like whether you get paid overtime or not, like, but you're going to be working more. But the trick
yeah,
is 1 month of quote unquote pain, is 1 month of
yeah,
doing that worth 20% of your time every month for the next 12 months. Well,
yeah,
sure, the math works out. Right?
yeah. No, it compounds. It compounds pretty quickly. And
Yeah.
to continue your definition, so I mean, you're talking about companies that are growing relatively fast. What is sort of the employee size? So like I've talked to some HR or some VCs and people like in Silicon Valley that they have there's this dogma now that at I think they've said 30 people, an organization that has 30 people should bring in a head of people. Everyone in San Francisco likes to say head
Yeah.
of people now, not
Yeah.
HR. They should bring in a head of people. So you're talking about sort of that level, or are you talking about as they grow into that next level where they need sort of specialists rather than HR generalists? What is sort of your definition in this sector?
Well, so I think if we look at if we look at the hyper small, if we look at the people, the organizations that are really really small, um, the honest truth of it is, PEO, professional employment organization, that's the way to go. If you're super small, like you
Yep.
you can be an HR of one, but outsource as much as you can, because if you get 12 people and you're one of them, you don't have two hats, you get 10. So
Yeah.
where's the crossover point? You say 30. I would say that 50 is the absolute upper end limit, right?
Yeah.
At 50, and part of that's because there's law stuff that changes, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it increases your compliance burden, and so there's some of that, but we get to 50, and I'm like, yes, you've got to start making real investments in HR.
Do you think some of that compliance can be outsourced, or do you always recommend to have somebody in house that's really looking over that type of stuff?
So I don't think those are so I don't exactly think those are binary, right? I think the
Yeah.
question is, uh, what of the compliance issues can be outsourced and is appropriate to outsource, right? And do I think, again, at 50, there's a certain level of responsibility that happens, and so you need somebody to supervise that work who is an employee, right?
Okay.
But the degree to which you do that internally versus externally is a choice. You can look at benefits, right?
Yep.
And secondary benefits behind pay, it's still very expensive. It's a very big issue. And on the one hand, you can pick a vendor that is basic, right? And they basically are a pass through, and you plug in with some big large insurance organization.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Yeah.
other option is you can buy services surrounding that, um, medical benefits package, right? And they're getting a percentage, they're getting a little more, but they may be doing more, right? We're seeing all sorts of things around fitness and health and all those things that as a small organization you don't have time to do.
Yeah.
But you can buy some of that, buy your compliance, and package that in with the overall benefits package that you're acquiring externally. Now, you internally are still supervising that. You're still making sure that they're dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's, but you're not involved in the day-to-day execution of the work to do it. In as a reference point, you know, people don't do their own taxes at a corporate level,
Yeah.
right? You hire a CPA to do it. It's not actually
Yep.
required until you're public, but we all do because it doesn't make sense for us to do it. Are we
Yeah.
still responsible? Are we still ultimately the single neck to choke? Yes, but we outsource that by finding an accounting partner who is capable of doing that work, and then it's just our responsibility to review and support it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you bring in a CPA. I mean, I have seen, there are HR benefits people and things that do have sort of that certification that allows you to outsource some of this. But I agree. I mean, you know, when you're talking about some of these things about benefits and employee retention, I mean, it's hard to outsource that because you also want to offer sort of a custom experience or a good experience for your employees, not just the out of the box, like, well, what's this guy doing? Because it'll be hard to retain and win employees if you're just doing what the next guy's doing as well.
Right. Well, and it's a dizzying array of options. Like if anyone has had a chance to go to one of the larger conferences, right? The
Mhm.
SHRM conference is whatever it is, 20,000 people and so much exhibit space that you're going to wear out a tread on your shoe.
Yeah.
And they have everything. There's pet insurance and there's pet daycare and there's elder care and
Yeah.
there's like eh, and there are all these things that you can do, but the thing is, like, how do you as an HR of one know which thing is going to motivate people both to apply and to stay?
Yeah.
What's going to drive your acquisition and your retention of employees? That's super hard.
Yeah. Do you find this is kind of veering off
Yeah,
from that, but do you find in that sort of retention, we discussed it on a webinar a few months ago, the positioning of that and making people feel like that's not just table stakes. Like
right,
a lot of times people show up at a job, it's like, well, that you should be giving that to me, making
right.
them feel like you are going the extra mile. How do you communicate that, and how do you kind of go beyond to make sure that, what you are doing is noticed and appreciated?
Well, so I do think, in all fairness, I think medical is table stakes. Let's
Yeah.
call a
Yeah.
spade a
Yeah.
spade, right? That's table stakes.
In America, for sure.
Right. In America, for sure, we have to do that. But I think, when you start to offer other things, and whether that's childcare, elder care, pet insurance, all those other things that you can offer, um, then you have to sort of position it as a place that they can't do on their own, but is important to them. Right. And whether your competitors are doing it or not is actually not the point. The point
Yeah.
is, does the person who is your employee feel as if you're doing this because it matters to them and is important to them? And so, at the very highest level, it's, we heard this from you. And if I can tell them where, like an employee survey, then I'm going to tell them that. I'm going to connect it to, this is what we heard from you, and this is how we responded to you.
Okay.
There's also a fair amount of really good work as we get into this kind of motivational space about intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards. And we tend in business to use extrinsic rewards. You're going to get a bonus, salesperson, if you sell into this level. We know that actually decreases intrinsic drive, their desire to do a good job. And so we've got to be very careful about how we position not just benefits, but incentives, and do that in such a way that we're not destroying that intrinsic drive to do a good job.
Interesting. No, that's I haven't actually thought about it that way, but that's true. I think especially in remote work settings now,
Mhm.
that ownership and that agency that people need to feel and need to have for, the business or for, their daily work is so much more important than before, because now you can't just rely on the relationships they're building or that sort of in-office experience. You got to, have people that take ownership in what they do and have that intrinsic value.
Yeah, and to add on to that, you have to think about, how do I, in a remote workplace environment, build that camaraderie, that
Yeah.
community, that collaboration, that connection, whatever we want to call it, because it isn't going to happen naturally.
Yeah.
You've got to be
No, absolutely.
so much more intentional about it. And again, we're talking about this organization size that has maybe one person, maybe, maybe it's not an HR of one technically, maybe it's one and a half. They get half the receptionist or
Yeah.
something, right? But how did they manage all of these variables? Because there's a lot.
It's true. So circling back into HR1 and
Yeah.
this feeling of sort of the overwhelmed, the chasing their tail, what do you think is causing this feeling? Like, what is the root cause here?
Well, I mean, we've been talking about some of it, right? We've been talking about benefits. We've been talking about, there's this dizzying array of options, and what does it mean, and how do you connect it? Um, you know, there's also this issue of retention, right? Because in a large organization, the fact that you have turnover is a machine. It's sausage making, right?
Yeah.
Like, there is a talent acquisition process, and at any given time, there are hundreds or thousands of people in that process, and a certain percentage are going to kick out, and but when you're in an organization that has, say, less than 30 people, to use the threshold we used earlier, um, it's traumatic, right? Your head of
Yeah.
sales leaves, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta find a head of sales. I've never done
Yeah.
that before," right? Like, or I did it one time, and that's the guy I'm replacing, right?
Yeah.
And so the things that, when you have automation and you have a bigger system and you have processes, aren't a big deal, are much, much bigger when you're that tiny little organization that's trying to grow.
No, I completely understand, and I can sympathize with that. Being a tiny organization, that sometimes you're replacing a salesperson, sometimes you're replacing a sales lead, sometimes a product manager, and the HR aspects are definitely daunting.
Right. Well, and you don't do it often enough
Yeah.
to get good at it,
Yeah.
right? Like, we know that if we do it every day. So let's talk about surgeries here. If you have a choice, if you have a hernia surgery. Now, hernia surgery is fairly common, particularly in the US, right? If you
I had one this year. I
Okay.
know what it's like.
Okay. So if you have the choice between going to a med center with a
Mhm.
surgeon who all they do all day long is hernia surgeries, or go to your primary care physician because you trust them, right? Or a surgeon you happen to know or something. Here's
Yeah.
the thing. Go to the person that does it every single day.
Yeah.
Because they have built the skill and the experience, and you may not know them, but they built the skill and experience. So when we start talking about hiring in smaller organizations, particularly higher level positions, there's no mechanics to it. There's no mechanism. There's no muscle memory, and so it's super, super hard, right?
This is actually where I've seen the people that come out of organizations like Google, Spotify, Facebook, these high growth organizations have such an advantage because even at the lowest levels, or Amazon's an amazing example, they're hiring muscle. They interview because Amazon makes you interview other people, even if you're at the lowest levels of Amazon.
Right.
So you learn quickly, like how to identify talent, what questions you have to ask. And it's one of the most important skill sets in growing and building a business that doesn't really get talked about. And it's an underrated skill of the people coming out of those companies.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you a quick story. So I was working for a large consulting firm in the US, accounting consulting firm. And
Mhm.
I went to a talent recruiting workshop because I had people that we were recruiting. And so we get to this thing, and it's all the scores and all the magical stuff, right? And my question for the presenter was, so if I know 2 minutes into the interview, they're not going to make it, how do I get them out of my office? You would have thought I had run over the guy's cat. Like, he was like, I think you've missed the point. I'm like, no. You don't understand. I've got the point. The point is, this is a machine. And the
Yeah.
faster I clear the people that aren't going to work, the faster this works. And it's just funny to think about it a little differently.
How do you deal with, I actually agree with that. I think that you should, I need to talk to 100. It's a funnel. It's a marketing
Yeah.
funnel. I have to talk to
Yeah.
100 to get to 50 to get to 20.
Yeah.
How do you deal with that in the day now with like Glassdoor? Glassdoor, a lot of the reviews on Glassdoor, when you actually read them, are people that interviewed with the company, not people that worked at the company. So
Right.
there are, you are getting feedback about how they interviewed me, how they treated me, how the feedback was. What is your recommendation to companies that do operate like a machine to avoid sort of those negative feedbacks that they could get?
Well, so they say they work like a machine, and they can, but they
Mhm.
don't. Like, so here's the thing, right? Um, we know that if someone submits an application, you should send them an email and let them know, hey, we've got your application, it's being reviewed. And you should set expectations. And people don't send the email and they don't set expectations,
Yeah.
right? And then you go do an interview, right? And you get no communications out of the system that they've got for the applicant tracking, right? And it needs to tell you, typically we expect for these kinds of positions that it'll take 3 to 5 days for people, right? Like, we say it's a system, but the actual automation that we have doesn't support, or hasn't been set up to
Yeah.
really communicate. So what I find when I'm talking to people who had a bad experience as an applicant to an organization is communication, communication, communication. They don't get told, hey, they said my breath stinks or whatever. That doesn't happen. We have normal
Yeah.
courtesy. But what
Yeah.
frustrates them is, I had this interview and now I can't get a hold of the manager who I interviewed with. I can't
Yeah.
talk to this, right? And
Yeah. I
on
can't
the
get the
other side of it,
feedback
I
I need.
get it. You don't have time for all that. But how do you balance that to make sure they're getting some sort of communication? Because we also know about human behavior that system communication is okay. They want it to feel personal in the end, but the
Yeah.
intervening stuff can all be very, very automated.
Yeah. Do you think that the burden of that falls on the company or falls on the tools that they're using a lot of times? Like that they weren't properly implemented, or the tool didn't teach their client how to use the ATS correctly? Where do you think the burden should fall? Because there are people that, we're a software company. We get support tickets sometimes where people complain about something. It's like that's just like it should be set up that way. We set it up for you that way. And they're like, it's not working. And,
Mhm.
where does the burden fall? Because sometimes because someone unclicked something, sometimes because in the ATS they never put that they wanted to have automated. Where do you feel the burden kind of falls there?
Ultimately, it's that chief people officer, right? Like, it's the chief. human resource officer, it's their responsibility to acquire and retain talent.
Yeah.
It's right. Like that's what they're there for.
Yeah. That's
And
their KPI.
if they don't, if they're not setting, like whether they have the automation or not is actually not the point. The point is that they're insistent about the way that humans who interact with the company are treated. Now, they can't necessarily deal with the sales side because there's other people, but at least through the applicant system, through like post termination, right?
Yeah.
And let's call it termination with cause, right? Like let's make it like it's their fault. But still, how do you communicate with them? Right? In the United States, depending upon your size, you send them a letter that's a Cobra letter that has it might have been written by Martians,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. I agree.
And so but as a people officer, right? What do you want to do? You want to be communicating with something. I'm sorry that didn't work out this time. And that's truth, right? Whether
Yeah.
they would cause or not, you're sorry it didn't work out because it still costs you money to replace them. It
Yeah.
still
Well,
costs
it
you money
costs you
to
money.
train.
You invested money into that
Right,
person. Like
right,
it costs you money to hire them, train
right,
them, and replace them.
right. So you are in fact sorry it didn't work out, right? Send them a letter. And how many organizations are doing that? Almost none, right? But
Yeah.
but but from a life cycle perspective, it is the chief people officer, human relations officer, whatever. Their responsibility is how do I interact with people? Communications are so flippin' easy to automate these days, right? Like it is super,
Yeah.
super simple in anything to be able to communicate. Even if it's an email, I'll take an email over nothing any day.
Yeah. 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 Something. You're
Something.
right. Over communication is the key. I think to almost anything nowadays, like in remote work settings, especially over communication
Mhm.
is what everyone should be focused on. It could be annoying. It could seem like micromanaging. It could be bothersome, but I think oftentimes it's the best way to keep people, moving in the same direction and making sure that they feel good about whatever the outcomes were
Yeah.
from something that happened.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you a quick question.
Yeah.
The key needs for people in this sort of HR one. I wanted to also ask around. We're talking about like tech companies and sort of fast growing companies. I've talked to a lot of HR people in like our sales, even some of our clients, and in like our own podcast before that they're dropped in to often 75, 100-person companies, usually like manufacturing type
Yep.
of companies. They're dropped in as the only HR person. Maybe there was
Yep.
one before them, maybe there was none before them.
Right.
And they're put into these roles where they're not going to grow at, 50, 100% per year, but they are going to, they're trying to keep the organization moving forward, and they oftentimes do push it forward. But I've talked to some that maintain that sort of one or two people in the organization from 75 to 150 to 200. What are the key needs for folks in this sort of HR of one or one and a half or two people
Yep.
that you see?
Yeah. And let's first let me validate that, I see a lot of this in manufacturing. I see a lot of this in professional services. There are some
Mhm.
organizations that have reached their natural size is what I'll call it. This is the
Yeah.
size that the organization wants to be at.
Yeah.
And it's going to have one HR person forever, or maybe it'll have one and a half or whatever. But I think that's okay. Right. That's actually I've got a couple of manufacturing clients that I just love. Right. They're not going to set the world on fire, but
Yeah.
they do stuff that matters, and that's super
Yeah.
cool. So to answer your question, so I think that there are probably three things that they really need to be thinking about whenever I'm talking to folks. I'm talking to them first about efficiency. Where can you get
Okay.
efficiency? And you're like, well, yeah, but you're going to be there, but the problem keeps getting more and more complex, right? Andrew, you were talking about Glassdoor, right? And what does that
Yep.
mean? And there are so many other pieces of the puzzle that keep getting more complex, more difficult, more competitive, and you need to be able to focus on those. And that means you got to get time back. That means you got to get efficiency. I think the second thing is support. It used to be that you could probably handle most of the stuff as an HR of one. You could get good enough at all the different compliance things and all the blah 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 that you had to do.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that you've got to figure out as an HR of one which things are the best, most appropriate things for you to outsource and get external support on, because
Okay.
you can't do it. The last is community. And I think that, the community bit is really interesting to me because it's the hardest thing to build, and it's the first thing to go away. So I do a lot of localized users groups, SHRM groups, and other kinds of groups where HR professionals congregate. And I would say to anybody listening, if you're not going to those, go to them, right? Because you can absolutely lament about the struggle you're having with getting medical benefits renewal, blah, 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 whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
The people in that room actually get it because they have the exact same problem. And you're like, no, they're way bigger than me. I'm like, trust me, they have the same problem. It looks a little different, right? The
Yeah.
outside coating is different, but it's the same problems. And you can get so much support from the people who are near you, the people that you can reach out to and pick up the phone and go, hey, Joe, please tell me, what did you do when you had an employee die? Because nobody wants to think about that until it happens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's something you don't really prepare for
No.
at any time. And one of the things, like in the Facebook groups when I was discussing this with people, that they kind of push back on there, that I always got the feeling that a lot of this kind of goes towards management, like management on a lower level. So if you're managing a specific team and someone, for example, dies in the team, I found I was debating with these people. I find it hard to believe that I would have a direct contact with my team, my manager, and then if I was having a struggle with something like this personally, I would all of a sudden go to HR to discuss it with them when maybe I didn't have direct contact with them. And their argument was that if HR is doing things right, they should have a personal connection with a lot of the people in the organization. But for me, that's the question here, is like, is that 100% necessary, or is that overkill? Is there an in-between between the HR of one and like, I need to have personal contact with everyone in the org?
So,
sorry, there's a couple questions in there.
Yeah, let's so let me unpack it a little bit. So let me start with what we know from Robin Dunbar's work is that we can have stable social relationships with about 150 people. Call a little more than half of that, or somewhere around half of that, personal connections. Call the other half of that professional connections. What that's going to tell you is when your organization size exceeds, call it 75, you really can't have real personal relationships with everybody. You can't. It's not possible. I think that what I have observed is there are a lot of topics where people will go to HR because they don't want to go to their manager directly. It could be it's embarrassing. It could be they don't want retribution. It could be there's a whole bunch of reasons. But I think
in some of those cases that I saw, like the discussion that was going on too, was the issue was the manager. That a lot of times it goes to HR when the issue is the manager. And one of the things that, I'm always a proponent of like direct sort of communication with things. And I understand HR sometimes has to come in and be the arbitrator there. What is the recommendation there? Does HR become the arbitrator? Do they become the protecting force to the person? Like, it feels like sometimes people were advocating for avoiding that direct confrontation with the manager if that was the problem they were having.
Yeah, so let me hit this from the perspective of the employee. The employee needs to go to HR. The power differential is too big. They can lose their job. There's no answer, but you have to go to HR. So then the question becomes, what does HR do about it?
Yeah.
And this is one of those places where they feel like they're chasing their tail, right? I've got another problem to deal with Bob again, right? And I know I need to get Bob training or I need to get him replaced, but I haven't had time to do that, right? Very variable to the situation. In some cases, HR directly goes and speaks with Bob. Part of that is they've been delegated the authority to terminate anyone in the organization for any time when they fail to uphold the values and mission of the organization. I would say that happens very rarely.
Yeah.
What more frequently happens is HR engages with that manager's manager and brings them up to date, make sure they're in
Yeah.
alignment with company values, and then the two of them approach that manager employee together. I have seen that happen where the CEO will go with HR, but that's also in the rare category.
Yeah. Probably in
It's
smaller organizations too, where
yeah,
there's more
absolutely.
direct contact.
Yeah, where the CEO knows that manager.
Yeah.
It's a pet, and I don't. This is odd. This is awful to say, but it's a pet manager. It's somebody who's
Yeah.
in the organization because the CEO likes them.
Yeah.
Um,
I know what you mean.
yeah, and so it's hard, right? I mean, I think HR, the work of HR when we're doing compliance, we're doing all the blah blah blah, like that for me is not exciting or interesting. I think most of
Yeah.
the people who are in HR are in it because they feel like they can help other people and they can have these relationships. But I would say the other bad part is the employee discipline process, right? And I
Yeah.
mean that at any level. If it's a manager, even the employees, right? An employee gets put on a performance improvement plan, a PIP, um, the HR folks hate that, right? In part because they know it's probably more work. There's some people that
Yeah.
recover from PIPs, there's some that don't, and but
Are there people that recover from them? That was a debate that I had with someone once
yeah,
that I that the percentage has to be very low. Like once you hit that point, it
it's not actually as low as you'd think.
really.
Bad managers don't communicate clearly to their employee, turns into a performance problem. HR gets involved, forces the clear articulation through a PIP. Employees like, oh, of course I can do that. No one told me to do that. Right. And you're
Interesting.
like,
Interesting. The manager thought they were just through osmosis, they were going to figure this out, and it wasn't being clearly communicated to the expectations.
yeah. And or the manager, it doesn't reach a boiling point for the manager yet. Right. They're like, I hate that Susie's always in 10 minutes late and we've got to answer the phone until she gets here. Right. For say a receptionist position, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a day that a client calls in mad because they couldn't get anybody. They called salesperson's cell phone or something,
Yeah.
right? That instigates Susie's got a PIP, right? And then Susie's like, "Oh, I didn't think it was a big deal, right? I was stopping to get Starbucks coffee on my way in or something, right?"
Yeah.
And she's like, "I'm just going to say that I have to be here at 7:50, and then I'll always be here by 8." Right? And she changes that, and it changes the system because no one has ever clearly articulated, here's the expectation, here's the impact, and here's the degree to which it's essential for your position. And I see managers do that all the time because they want to be nice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
They don't clearly communicate to avoid sort of the conflict that could come with it.
Yeah.
So I had one more final question here.
Sure.
How do you extrapolate the HR of one into organizations that are a little bit larger, 400, 500? Because I mean, I think the essence of it is what you just said in that last comment about HR people don't want to work on this boring stuff. They don't want to work on
Right.
compliance and documentation. So how do you extrapolate that to maybe organizations that do need 3 or 4 people, but they want to focus on the people and helping people and building good organizations? Just what is your vision of sort of that HR one as it grows, as it scales, and what do people need?
Well, I think all of it is. I mean, it's what we've been talking about all along, right? Which is take the stuff that you're good at, that you want to do, that is necessary for you to do that stuff, and then figure out how to get rid of the rest. Right? Like, and you're always going to have stuff that you don't want to have, that you don't want to do.
Yeah.
You're going to have to do it, right? Like whatever it is. But the trick is, as an HR of one, when people are become aware, when the CEO and the rest of the organization become aware you can't do it as one person, it doesn't justify a second person yet. That's the perfect time to go ask for automation, to ask for support. Hey, I need a HR consultant and I want to buy 200 hours of their time, and their job is to help me become more efficient, to help me implement a new system, to do those behaviors. And that is always the case, right?
Yeah.
Whether you got you've got one person in HR or 20 people in HR, there's always that edge where you can't quite justify one person yet.
Yeah.
And how do you find a way to buy that differential and hopefully buy it in a way that increases your efficiency and keeps you at whatever number you're at?
Yeah. No, I think that's actually global. I mean, you see that in almost every department,
Yeah.
that you're always like one person away, but we can't really hire either budgetary or need. And I think sometimes when I talk to HR people, I think they don't see that often, that it's like, no, sales and marketing is the same thing. Finance is the same
Yep.
thing. Production is the same thing. Everyone kind of runs into that. And I think HR, the issue is a lot of times they get squeezed faster because their KPIs aren't as clear, because it's
Yep.
not as results driven to some of the top or bottom line.
Right.
And so they end up complaining about it. But I hear that quite often. I often remind them, like, that sounds familiar to all parts of an organization.
Listen, so let me flip this over for just a second, right? Like, so how many organizations that you work with or have worked with, run, do you have a number that you can tell me is the acquisition cost for an employee as a
I couldn't
percent?
tell you. I don't think, even I had a conversation a few weeks ago on our podcast with a guy that talked about employer branding,
Mhm.
and they couldn't quantify it. He said that the brand is so important to build up because it's hard to quantify the CAC, and oftentimes it's mixed in with marketing, it's mixed in with something else. And he says we can't quantify it because it kind of goes across the org and gets diluted everywhere.
Right.
So that's tough.
And so that's the problem, right? Like what you were just talking about, the metrics are soft, right? At some level, I actually don't think the metrics are as soft as people want to make them be. I think you can figure out what it costs to hire a person, and it stratifies, right? Like it's high, medium, low. But I think you can figure out what does it cost, and then I think you can start to have the conversation about, are you optimizing employee retention to minimize this rehiring cost?
Yeah. The cost
Right.
of acquisition,
Right.
which everyone's optimizing for in a lot of other areas of the business, but especially in sales and marketing, but not as focused on it in HR.
Because it's indirect, and it means you got to train managers and leaders to
Yeah.
be better managers and leaders, and you've got to do a bunch of stuff as the HR department, right? But we're not actually measuring my observation is we're not measuring those metrics well, right?
Interesting. I'd actually love to dive into that, sort of the cost of acquisition inside of some of our clients or other companies, because that is an interesting metric that this guy that talked about employer branding was really the first time I'd heard someone discuss it. But like I said, he kind of saw it as a very diluted number that went across the org. And that was one of the reasons we were discussing, like, how does he get budget for marketing to employees? And he said, it's always a battle with marketing. We try to work with them, but they also, they don't want to give up some of their budget for us to hire more. But it is the lifeblood of a company too, the people.
Right. Yeah.
Well, Rob, thank you so much. I really enjoyed talking to you about this. I would love to talk to you more, because I think you have insights that go way beyond this topic that would be excellent to hear more about. We kind of in the vein of this discussion of, how an HR one can be more effective. We prepared someone from our team, Alexi, is here to kind of go through, how you can use a portal like ours to make your employees more effective, make it easier on them. So we brought Alexi in here so he could at least do a quick demo and show people, how you could be an HR of one using a product like Lanteria. So Alexi, take it away.
Hey there, this is Alexi. Very nice to be here. So what do I need to do to share my screen? Just give me 1 second, I'll try. Am I presenting? Can you please confirm?
Yep.
Yes.
We got you.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll probably base it on my own experience, the way I see the self-service in Lanteria HR. First of all, what is great about this portal, the employees portal, is that you don't need any technical experience to be able to use it. It's very easy to navigate, and options are grouped around logical areas like my details, my time, my performance, my learning, my company. You can get inside of here from your Office 365, just clicking one button, because there is a single single sign-on. So the main processes I use inside of this tool is, first of all, I see all the tasks that are pending. Obviously, in different modules, there may be different tasks related to different areas, pending performance reviews, pending tasks from the HR processes, but the system collects all of them as well in one view, so you will be able to see what is required, what you have to complete. You can use the self-service as a page. I personally prefer to use it as a card. It's just a matter of visual preference, so you can use it as a card just like this, or you can use the same features over here. You don't have to do that twice because it's the same backend database. So let's go to the card probably. First of all, probably one of the most typical things I would do using my self-service is booking a leave or an absence. So I will go over here where I can see my absence management dashboard. Employees can have different absence packages. So depending on where you are located, depending on what is the origin of your job role, you can have different balance of vacations. In general, you can have a different absence plan. So a person in one location can have one set of absences, and the person in another location will have another set of absences. Also, even in the same team, two colleagues can have different absence plans. So I will see my balance per year. I will see what I have booked and what is remaining. Plus, I will see the history of my requests. The requests for the absences may be pending, or they may be approved, or maybe the manager has made a proposal. Like, I've requested a vacation, the manager agreed, but offered to push my vacation 2 weeks later. So I will also see that here. I'll be able to book one of the absence types allowed for myself. Um, let's take what I've taken vacation, right? So I will specify when I leave and when I return, plus I can fill out more fields. What is great about the tool is that our admin or our HR can customize any fields. So if we need any particular information to be reflected, for example, I'm booking a business trip and I need to separately specify the cost of the tickets, accommodation, anything else, that can be easily added. As an employee, I cannot do that, unfortunately, but I can ask our admin and these fields will appear very soon. The system also has reminders and notifications. So whenever I request something like an absence or whatever else, the person who is responsible will always get an email notification. In addition to this, I will be able to see my documents. I can store any documents online inside of the system. It can be one library for everything, or it can be a number of libraries like certificates separately, maybe some medical documents separately, university diploma separately, and so on. It is very easy to configure multiple folders for that. We also have my performance. This is where I will be able to see if there are any performance reviews pending for myself. Normally, they would be initiated not by myself, of course, but by my manager or maybe by the HR of the company. What I will have to do is, after I get a notification sent to my email box, I click the link and I get into my assessment form, and then I will see what the company expects me to say about myself. Because in particular cases, only the manager rates something, but in some other cases, the company may ask me to add my self-assessment, like what do I think about my time management, for example. It is unsatisfactory, and so on and so forth. Very easy to use. I submit that, and then my manager gets notified that I have provided some responses. Going further, oh, sorry, that's the HR manager. No, that's not for today. Sorry. We also have the learning module. What I like about this one is that if I open my own card, I will be able to see the development plan that I have. I need to explain. We've got the development plan, which is a list of activities that I have to attend, courses, online or classroom, or maybe something similar to webinars. There also are development needs. I will say a few words later about them. But if you plan to like schedule the development of your employees many years ahead, That is also possible. So first of all, what is the development plan? List of the courses that I have to pass, or maybe training activities that I should attend. I will see them over here. They can be assigned to me by my manager. They can be mandatory for me if I match some prerequisites, which is, I think it is very convenient for the HR, because it is possible when creating a course to make it mandatory for people who match certain job role, skill, or something like that. And if I do match, then I will be assigned automatically to that course. And the administrator of trainings doesn't have to waste time. I can open the catalog and see if there is anything interesting for myself, and I can add it to my plan. Also, if I have seen a very interesting advertisement of some course or a training happening outside of my company, I will fill out this form. If it costs something, I will select the currency, I will provide the amount, and then my management or whoever else is responsible will make a decision. Invest into my development or not invest into my development. By the way, each employee can have the budget for the training tracked. I also told that my company can plan my development many years ahead. So basically, if it is required, just give me 1 second, my development needs, if it is required, let's imagine for myself to learn Japanese language. And if I do, then maybe within 5 years from now, I will be able to move to some position in Japan when we open an office or something like that. So the company needs to plan my strategic development for the future period. The company can create development needs for myself. So they will assign a name, they will specify whether it's mandatory or not, and then which competencies and maybe which certificates I will have to acquire on my way to achieving some important knowledge target. That's most of it. We also have the overview of the company. The company can store useful files for me and for any other employee. We've got the company documents. So any procedures, policies, descriptions of anything, they can be stored over here. So they can be categorized. We can see that I have 5 categories, but it is very easy to add more. Just in case there is some online documentation that people have to read, you will be able to store it over here. My company, what else we have over here? We've got the out of office calendar. That's convenient because I can see when my teammates are out of the office or are planned to be out of the office. This calendar will show me the past, present, and the future absences, but in case they are approved. If not, they will be only visible for the managers of the people who requested those absences. So, taking a look at this report, I will be able to plan my own vacation. For example, I see that I'm a support engineer and all support engineers have booked vacations. And if I try to book, then the support department is going to be empty. We cannot afford that. So, looking at this calendar, I will plan my vacation accordingly. I will try to book it after all those other people who have already booked. That's pretty much it. The dashboard. So, on the front page of my self-service, I've got all my tasks. I have the announcements. These can be any random announcements that the HR or the manager of the company or anybody else who manages this will be able to submit. Like, imagine that tomorrow we've got some repairs in the office building and please everybody stay at home because there will be no electricity, something like this. So such announcements can appear over here. Congratulations, I will be notified about them. And feedbacks. What I like about this feature is that at any point of time, I can give feedback to any of my colleagues, and I can also request feedback from any of my colleagues. It doesn't necessarily have to be used as a part of some performance review cycle. I can do it whenever I want to, but later, yes, the company can consider. For example, at some point of time, I feel like I want to say my opinion about one of my colleagues, and I will just give that feedback. Also, I can assign a picture that the person is a great leader, team player, and anything like that. Well, that's pretty much it. Like I said, getting over here is very easy because in most cases, the system is used by the companies who are familiar with Microsoft, with Office 365, and employees get here with just one click from their Office 365. No extra logins, no extra passwords, nothing like that. I also must say, from the side of the admin, yes, there are certain permissions, meaning that the system out of the box has some understanding of what people can do and cannot do, which pages they can visit and cannot visit, what they can edit or not. But these permissions can be adjusted. So, in case I, as an employee in a particular company, should have something very special, maybe because of local legislation or maybe some traditions or anything like that, this can be adjusted. Again, out of the box, there is certain set of what the employee can do and cannot do, but that can be easily adjusted by the administrator. Well, I think I told most of my experience, unless anyone would have any questions, but I think that's pretty much most of it. Thank you.